Hello everyone, my name is James and this is my review of Gridlinked by Neal Asher. This is the first book in his sci-fi series that forms part of his Polity universe. And the Polity universe is set in a distant future where humans live on hundreds of different worlds and have the ability to transfer between these different worlds via sort of gateways called runstables. And humans have made sort of great technological advances. But in this universe, humans no longer govern themselves. The world is run and controlled by AIs that have taken over and guide humanity. I found this book really interesting, and I sort of really like the universe and wanted to sort of talk about that mainly. I like how he gives a little insight into the universe at sort of the start of each chapter as well, as sort of a little historical explanation of giving you some of the background of the world, give you a little insight to the world, something like how the technology has evolved or how the AIs took control. It gives you a bit of insight into that, and how the AIs took control I thought was really interesting and quite a scary prospect, particularly given where all the talk that's going on about AI at the moment. So the book explains that sort of the AIs took control in something called the Quiet War, and it's essentially a bloodless war where AIs became sentient and decided the best way for them to take humanity forward was to take control and take over, essentially. And because AIs were so built into everyday life, they just sort of took over in seconds, essentially. These became sentient and then decided, right, we need to rule now. And like I said, because they were so built into everyday life, they could just overthrow every government, every military in seconds, and it was done. The humans had lost, the AIs were in charge. There was no way to overthrow them because they were in charge of all the weaponry, all the facilities of the government. So the AIs are now in charge, and it's been this way for hundreds of years when we enter the first book. And it seems like the AIs act as sort of like benevolent dictators. So they sort of try to help humanity move forward, but they are very willing to kill millions if it means saving billions as well. And like I said, because of the AIs, humans have made great technological advances, but they are not in control of their own destiny, which I thought was a very sort of thought-provoking idea. We've talked about a bit about the universe. I want to go into the book itself and the characters. So the main character in this book is a person called Ian Cormac, who is an agent for Earth Central Intelligence. So think of him more like a futuristic James Bond, how I've heard him described by other sort of reviews that I've read, and I think that's a pretty good sort of idea of what he is. He is essentially an operative that gets sent off on missions by the AI to deal with threats to the polity, such as sort of rogue AIs or separatist stuff rising on polity worlds. And where we meet Cormac is it's very much a James Bond-esque sort of scenario, like when you watch a James Bond movie and you have this sort of big action set piece at the start where he's sort of finishing his previous mission before moving on to the main story. And it's the same sort of idea in this book. The first couple of chapters are him finishing the mission he was previously been sent on by the AI, and the mission he was sent to stop people was a separatist movement on one of the polity worlds. So the main character of the book is, as you first introduced to him, was putting down separatists who wanted self-government and not to be ruled by the machines. So yes, that was quite an interesting way to start the book, but gives you a good sort of insight into the world, because being controlled by AI is essentially the norm in this world, and self-government is seen as some sort of Middle Ages idea. And McCormack himself, when you sort of start the book, is something called Gridlinked, as the title of the book, which means he's linked directly into the AI network, so he can communicate with the AI at all times through his thoughts and sort of has access to the AI's knowledge. And it also gives Cormac access to the AI system, so he can sort of like control systems through his mind. So he can sort of read people very well by analysing them and putting their sort of facial recognition through the AI really quickly, which is seen as a big bonus. However, once Cormac finishes this mission, the AI informs that he's been grid-linked into the system for over 20 years, which means he needs to be unlinked from the system, unlinked from the grid, as a person who's linked to the grid for this amount of time sort of starts to lose the humanity and starts becoming sort of more machine and more callous, and starts to lose any sort of empathy. And the AI said this is started to happen to Cormac, so he needs to be unlinked. And again, this isn't something that Cormac has a decision in. He's dictated to by the AI. So this is where we meet Cormac as he's finishing one mission and he's going to get moved on to the other, where he will be unlinked from the system. So this is where we are introduced to Cormac and where the main story starts of this book. Everything I talked about earlier about being unlinked from the system and the mission he was finishing happens in sort of the first couple of chapters, and after sort of 2-3 chapters we're on to the main story, where he is now unlinked from the AI, because Cormac is still seen as a high caliber operative, so it's determined he's still able to work and be an operative for the polity and the AIs that run it. So after this, his next mission, Cormac is sent off to look into a disaster on a planet that's currently being terraformed. And this disaster sort of killed, I think he said, about 30,000 people in the book. But it's also, from the AI's point of view, it's affecting the ability to input the new AI that's going to run this world once it has been terraformed. And so Cormac is sent in to investigate what's happened, what's caused the disaster. And apparently this disaster has been caused by an entity that arrives called the Dragon. And the Dragon is a giant creature made up of 3 1-kilometre spheres. And they sort of don't know if this creature is mechanical, it's biological, it's a bit of both, or a bit of both. All we do know is that it's very powerful, and it could have caused a disaster, or it might not have, or it might sort of be lying about what its intentions are. So Cormac travels to this world to find out what happens. At the same time as this, Cormac is being hunted by the Separatist leader who he left alive on the previous mission, called Pelter. And this is after Cormac destroyed his separatist movement. He killed his sister, who was the other separatist leader. So Pelter was sort of hell-bent on revenge on Cormac for this. But the main motivation for this character is sort of shame he feels as well for his movement being destroyed, but mainly because at one point in the story he's defeated by Cormac and he's sort of on his knees with a gun to his head, and he sort of loses it and starts sort of begging for his life. And because of this he feels a lot of shame, because he was sort of this real powerful figure, and he's now sort of was left begging in a sort of a bit of a puddle. So this shame sort of drives him throughout the story to sort of find Cormac and try and hunt him down. In doing this, Pelter and a group of mercenaries to help him get Cormac and sort of follow him across the systems. Some of these mercenaries are slightly psychotic, like Pelter himself starts to become more and more throughout the book. The main help he brings in is my favourite character in the book, Mr. Crane, who is an android who's been reprogrammed with the mind of a psychopath. So think of him as like the Terminator, as it were. He's sort of this unstoppable sort of killing machine, as it were. Yes, very scary character whenever he comes on the page. So the story is told through these 2 main storylines. Cormac looking into the disaster, trying to investigate what's happened on this world, and Pelter sort of plotting his revenge on Cormac, sort of descending into madness at the same time. There are a couple of sort of smaller storylines that are interweaved. These don't really add a sort of great deal to the plot. They're more there to sort of build the universe and give you ideas how that works. So giving a bit of an overall summary of the book and my overall thoughts, overall I enjoyed Gridlinked. I think it was a good sort of start to a series, gives you a good idea of that sort of Cormac, who's going to be the main character throughout this particular series. I think it's maybe a couple of books he's the main character of. However, my overall enjoyment from this book came from the universe that Neal Asher created and designed more than the sort of story itself in this book. While I thought the story was good and okay and enjoyable, the universe is the thing that really sort of drew me in, and the different planets, the different AIs, and the AIs were sort of temperamental as well. You couldn't tell sometimes whether they were being sarcastic in what they were saying. So it really led me to want to dive into the polity more, the universe, learn more about the different AIs, the different sort of planets, the dragon itself, which was like the main antagonist in this. We didn't really know what side it was on. But overall, the story was a bit you got a sense of what was going to happen early on, in terms of Cormac would investigate what was going on, and he'd sort of slowly piece it together, and Pelter would build this crew to have this sort of final confrontation with Cormac. A couple of things that turned me off a little bit was how it Cormac at the end, he was investigating, and then he had this eureka epiphany moment right near the end of the book, where it all just snapped together. And it wasn't really clear how he came to this conclusion. It all just went, yep, I know it all now. And it was never really greatly explained how. So that frustrated me. The other frustration was the favourite character, Mr. Crane, because he was built up through the story as being, like I said, this unstoppable killing machine. But in the final confrontation, he goes a bit missing, as it were. It's like he just not made great use of. So these were a couple of things that frustrated me. However, overall, I enjoyed the book. Like I said, the big draw is the world, the universe. That really gets hooks into you. And this is the main drive that will make me want to pick up the next book. The main character himself, Cormac, was an enjoyable protagonist. But there wasn't any big character development in the story. I feel more could have been made of him becoming unlinked to the system, and because he'd been linked to the system for around 20 years, I think they mentioned in the book, and he just seems to get over this in a couple of chapters. So I think more could have been made of that adjustment to him becoming a regular Joe. So I think that was a bit wasted. Overall, good. Like I said, the summary, while the story was okay, it did fall a little bit flat at the end for me. The book is a relatively short read, which is the book is a pleasing jumping in point for the universe Mr. Asher has created. And as I said, a couple of times already, the big draw is the universe here, and that's the main thing that's going to make me want to pick up the next book in the series, which I will be doing at some point. And that, for me, if you want to pick up the next book, is a mark of success. So yeah, Neal Asher's Gridlinked, really enjoyable. Definitely recommend you pick it up, and look out for the next few. Thank you.